You're listening to the Spare No Arrows podcast, a show that equips Christians to stand against our anti-Christian culture. My name's Cody Lawrence, and I'm here to discuss culture, politics, theology, and building Christendom for the glory of God with courage, biblical truth, and sound doctrine. Russell Moore is at it again. There was a silly little podcast that came out a few days ago called Troops in D.C., Doug Wilson, and Make America Healthy Again, where Russell Moore had an absolute meltdown about Doug Wilson. And I want to focus in on the part of this podcast that is kind of going around and has sort of gone viral and Canon Press, Doug Wilson's organization, has latched onto this and I think have just a hilarious, wonderful response. But who is Russell Moore? For those of you who don't know, I've mentioned him on the podcast before. He used to be big in the SBC and has since left to bigger and worse things. But Russell Moore was previously the president of the public policy arm of the largest Protestant denomination in the world, the SBC. And the organization that he was the president of specifically was called the ERLC, or the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission, which to this day, thanks in large part to Russell Moore, is massively liberal. And it is so much embroiled in controversy that the newest president, named Brent Leatherwood, has been recently forced to resign because of the massive discontent that the SBC broadly has with the organization. So this is the legacy that Russell Moore left behind in the SBC. And where did he go after this? He went to Christianity Today. Russell Moore abandoned the SBC he claimed to love so much to attend a non-denominational church and become the editor-in-chief of Christianity Today, one of the highest positions possible. Now, Christianity Today used to be much more respectable as a Christian publication company than it is now. But very recently, just in the past few years, and even many articles from this year and last year are pretty rough too, but I'll just give you some examples of some of the ideas that Christianity Today has pushed. They have pushed anti-church messages, like encouraging churches to capitulate to illegal mandates to shut down. They have pushed anti-science messages, like encouraging people to mask and get experimental mRNA vaccines. They have also pushed anti-Bible messages, like encouraging people to believe that loving your neighbor means doing what the government says about vaccines and masks and closing your church. That's what loving your neighbor means, according to Christianity Today. They've also pushed anti-conservative messages as a publication company that considers itself, or at least tells people that it's conservative. Russell Moore calls himself a conservative, but they have pushed very anti-conservative messages. Often they encourage their readers to abandon the traditional values of conservatism and promote something called third wayism, where basically it's like, it's okay to not be a conservative. There's this middle ground between conservatism and liberalism that's where Christians ought to be, because Jesus didn't call himself a conservative. It doesn't matter that the word conservative wasn't around back then, but Jesus didn't call himself a Republican. He didn't call himself a conservative. So therefore, we shouldn't either. Now, this is third wayism, and it essentially just means you should become more liberal than you are. So Christianity Today is a huge propaganda tool, essentially. And this is what Russell Moore has become the editor-in-chief of. They've also pushed more recently pro-illegal immigration, anti-ICE content, and so on. So all that to say is Christianity Today is very poorly named. Another fun fact about Russell Moore, this is what he looks like. You can only see half of his face, though, because he has two masks on in this picture. He says, this hobbit is vaccinated. Round one, anyway. He posted this back in 2021. Thankful for all the astounding skill and speed of medical science to help rid us of this plague. Now, I have a question. Just let's use our memory. Hopefully we can remember 4 years ago. But did the pandemic quickly end after March 9th, 2021? Do you remember the slogan, 2 weeks to slow the spread? Do you remember when Anthony Fauci was saying that masks are effective, and then after the whole scamdemic was over, he started saying, yeah, masks were never effective. That's just what we wanted to make people do just so they felt safer. I mean, it was all a scam. Russell Moore fell for it. A lot of people fell for it. But one of the differences between Russell Moore and reasonable people is that reasonable people quickly saw the truth and didn't double down on it. Russell Moore doubled down on it, still proudly displays this picture on his Instagram page where he is wearing 2 masks, which doesn't work. That's not a thing. So anyway, Russell Moore, in other words, is a pretty verifiable loser. Russell Moore also has, over the years, pushed the SBC in a more liberal direction. Obviously, he fits right in at Christianity Today. So anyway, he started talking about Doug Wilson in response to a news bit that CNN ran about Doug Wilson. And so I know some people who listen to my program really hates Doug Wilson. I do not hate Doug Wilson. I think he's a faithful pastor, but I also think you have the freedom to think whatever you want. But what I do want you to kind of gather from this is what exactly Russell Moore is saying, the kinds of people he's talking about, and also Canon Press's response to what he said. So let's go ahead and listen to this part of the podcast.
Inside Wilson's broader theology, there is this profound emphasis on the importance of masculinity.
This is not Russell Moore, by the way. This is the podcast host, and so Russell Moore is going to come in later. So he's kind of setting up the question.
The roles of men. In the CNN interview, there's a lot of conversation about why, for instance, Wilson would argue that men should be in the military and women shouldn't, the differentiation of roles, this kind of thing. When the broader culture is constantly denigrating traditional visions of masculinity and maleness, if I put myself in Pete Hegseth's shoes, when Wilson shows up in your world and is saying, here's what it means to be a man, and being a man is good, we shouldn't be surprised that this stuff has resonance when progressive ideology has essentially denigrated masculinity for a long time.
So Russell Moore is about to jump in here, but the point that the host here makes is actually a good one. So the broad culture, including Christianity Today, including Russell Moore with his effeminate 2 masks and calling himself a hobbit, is that is an embarrassment to masculinity. Russell Moore clearly, I think he was a pastor at some point. If he was, he certainly didn't lead his church well. He's not a pastor anymore. He's not leading Christianity Today very well. I mean, he's probably leading them well according to their own mission. They're going exactly in the direction that they want to go in, but it's not a good direction. He didn't lead the SBC in a good direction. So I would say pretty confidently that Russell Moore is actually not a good man, because a man's job is to protect the things that he is responsible for. And Russell Moore has done an unbelievably poor job at that. So the point that the host is raising here is actually a really good one. If the culture oppresses in a real way masculinity and attacks masculinity, then that's going to lead people to people like Doug Wilson. Also, and this is kind of the direction that Russell Moore is going to go in here, except he's going to apply it to Doug Wilson. He's going to say this kind of masculinity that a lot of people are falling into is bad, dangerous masculinity. And I actually completely agree with that. I think because we have this liberal culture that has destroyed the public perception of good masculinity, that actually opens the door to people going crazy and misdefining masculinity and then grabbing onto this false, unbiblical view. Maybe even thinking, oh yeah, like this is true masculinity. Imagine somebody like Andrew Tate. Andrew Tate has gained a tremendous following these past few years because men are tired of being stepped on. Now, the irony is Andrew Tate is just stepping on those poor, depressed men, and he's taking advantage of them, and so they're actually proliferating their own problems. But let's listen to what Russell Moore has to say.
To deal pastorally with a lot of young men who have gotten involved in the Doug Wilson stuff. They do not become responsible, faithful men. They become losers who are finding a way somehow to blame women for their own lack of responsibility.
So he has evidently pastorally been involved in the lives of multiple young men who were into the Doug Wilson stuff. Now, what I find interesting about this is that he did not say that we're fans of Doug Wilson. He said that we're into the Doug Wilson stuff. And I think that's a fascinating thing that he said, because I know quite a few people who are very much into Doug Wilson and Canon Press, and I'm a Canon Plus subscriber. And all of the people that I know who are very, like follow the stuff that Canon Press puts out, their lives are very well put together. They're absolutely not losers. The men are manly. The women are feminine. It's the people. So, I've been actually talking about this kind of person. Doug actually does a lot to try to prevent men from going down this bad path. But it's the men that go down this bad path who actually don't like Doug Wilson, because Doug Wilson actually calls them to responsibility. So I don't know exactly who Russell Moore is talking about, but the problem is there actually is a problem where men are going down this fake version of masculinity. But Russell Moore is applying it to entirely the wrong audience. But let's continue.
And are able to somehow supplement the normal, ordinary 1 Timothy, 2 Timothy, Titus vision of what it means to be a responsible man with making sarcastic comments while drinking bourbon and smoking cigars and having that as a substitute in. And if you throw in some racist comments and call women derogatory terms, that makes it even better. That doesn't...
Yeah, now, that is a thing. That actually is a thing. People do that. There are people who exist who thinks smoking cigars and drinking bourbon is inherently masculine. There are people who think it is masculine to be racist and sexist and to say that women are NPCs and that women should be chained to the kitchen and make sandwiches. Really, this actually is a thing. It sounds like fantasy stuff, but I am a hardcore conservative person. And so usually if in the past, if a liberal were talking about these things, you'd be like, okay, nobody actually believes that. You're just characterizing me. But because of how bad the left has become the past few years, it actually has given birth to insane, depressed, pathetic men who actually hate women. That's a thing. There was a guy I was friends with who I've talked about before who had he was kind of an awkward dude. He had a tremendous amount of difficulty finding a girlfriend. He was in his 30s, and he went down these bad rabbit holes on the internet and started to hate women and hate marriage and say, well, it's women's fault that I can't find a girlfriend, instead of fixing himself, instead of actually accepting the responsibility that he has to improve himself. He just blamed women for his problems. Now, ironically, the kind of weak men that Russell Moore is alluding to kind of is a depiction of Russell Moore himself. Is this a picture of a strong man? Is this a picture of a man who leads his family and his church and the organizations he's a part of well? No. So if a verifiable loser calls other people losers, we should raise our eyebrow about that. That's kind of weird. What's happening here? But I think Russell Moore just has this, deep, insatiable hatred for Doug Wilson for some reason. But I think he does actually have his finger on something. His hatred, just as hatred does, is like this wildfire that spreads and burns things that outside of where it started. And ironically, that is exactly the problem with these pathetic men who have no idea what masculinity is, and they're taken to hating women. They're letting their hatred and their depression and their ineptitude, they're letting it bleed out into other areas and not actually focusing on their personal responsibility, but saying, oh, it's everybody else's fault. It's the women's fault. It's over here. And ironically, Russell Moore is doing exactly the same thing. Let's continue seeing what Russell Moore has to say.
It's not work. And so you don't even have, even at the pragmatic level, the picture of this. Look at, how can you argue with the results? Look at the results. They're terrifying. They're awful.
I think that word blame is really important, because if this is Doug Wilson's theology playing out on the micro level, when we talk about society, when we talk about the nation, we're seeing that on a grand scale. And it seems to mesh with this idea that Mr. Wilson put forth in the CNN interview, that a Christian nation was one where certain people just didn't really belong.
So one of the reasons we have such problems with assimilating Muslims and all these different Hindus is that there are so many of them, right? So if we had a Christian republic and a Muslim came to Disneyland with his family, we have no problems. But when they fill up Dearborn, Michigan, that's just not. You can. It says in Amos 3:3, can two walk together except they be agreed? You cannot put alien worldviews together, cheek by jowl, and have peace.
A black and tan would give us the impression that perhaps black people don't belong, at least a certain...
I don't know that she's ever read Black and Tan, but that's not actually the message of it at all. Now, let's also remember the Antioch Declaration that stirred up so many of these weak, pathetic men. I did a video on the Antioch Declaration that you can check out, but basically it's a statement that Doug Wilson helped draft that is against racial animosity. Now, the irony is Russell Moore is pro things like critical race theory, and anything not that is some kind of alt-right extremism. That's entirely possible that Russell Moore thinks that, but that's absolute nonsense. And I don't personally see anything wrong with what Doug Wilson just said in that clip.
With equal rights to others. Is this really just Christian nationalism laid bare for us?
Yes, because it's a denial of the gospel of Jesus Christ, which says that external conformity is not enough.
Oh, that's interesting. External conformity is not enough. Christianity Today pushed churches closing, and loving your neighbor is doing what the government says about vaccines and masks. And you should wear 2 masks, and you should get 2 vaccines, and you should, yada, yada, yada. Interesting. This is Russell Moore talking. So it's like, what a massive hypocrite. You can't trust these people. What sucks? Here's what really sucks about this is Russell Moore, in his minute amount of wisdom that he has access to, because he's such a dummy, he sees something that's a problem. But because his theology is so unbelievably twisted that he is lobbing a grenade and he's blowing up everybody. Look at the ERLC. Look at Christianity Today. Oh, it's a very masculine, conservative organization. But what stinks is I think Russell Moore is actually seeing a little bit of something, but also Canon Press and Doug Wilson is fighting that. I think they could be a little more vocal in their fighting, but those people really do exist. And here's an example. Here's an example of someone. Let's listen to this clip.
Well, I don't think that, it's like, well, I disagree with Pam Bondi because I think she's hiding the Epstein files. And I'd be like, yeah, but also I don't like Pam Bondi because she's a woman. And she should.
What? Yeah, I don't like Pam Bondi because she's a woman. What a thing for a pastor to say. This is a professing pastor, but he's not a pastor, Joel Webbin, he's a trans person. His brother is trans. Joel Webbin's brother is a trans, woman. So he's a man pretending to be a woman. And Joel Webbin is a trans pastor. And so he can, from behind the pulpit, say, I don't like her because she's a woman. Let's continue.
Shouldn't be in public, not in politics.
Shouldn't be in public.
You know, like the meme is like, you and I are not the same. You don't like it for this reason. I don't like, it's like, oh, I don't like Pam Bondi because of her positions. I'm like, I don't like Pam Bondi because she needs to be at home.
So women have to be at home all the time. So this is what I was talking about earlier, where there are actually people out there in the world who think women cannot leave their houses. Now, if you were to hold Joel, I think, I mean, we've gone into Joel Webbin so many times before, but I think he says inflammatory nonsense just so he can post it on the internet and get clips. But the thing is, he actually is leading people to believe this stuff. This is real life. He said, I don't actually think he believes this if you were to hold his feet to the fire, but what he said was women should be relegated to their homes and never leave. And then he says in this post, I'm not misogynistic, parentheses, I don't hate women. I'm sexist, parentheses. I believe women are distinct from men. It is a curse for women to exercise political rule / leadership. But that's not what he said. And he flaunts this clip of himself like he didn't say anything wrong. So in multiple places, he has said that women should not be in public. Now, what he could have said is women shouldn't be in public positions of leadership. Now, ironically, the Proverbs 31 woman was in a public position of leadership. And so we would have to biblically think, what public positions of leadership are women allowed to have versus not have? We are explicitly told in the Bible that women are not allowed to be in positions of leadership in the church. But does that mean that women can't own businesses? Well, it seems like the Proverbs 31 woman ran her family business. It seems like we have this picture of the husband working all day and making his part of the income, probably the majority of the income, and then the wife is in the marketplace and she's trading and she has employees and things like that. So this is the kind of thing that intelligent people should be able to recognize and distinguish from what Ken Impress is doing. And I think one of the biggest reasons for this is because Satan loves to infiltrate good things and destroy them from the inside. And so if evil things can be associated with some good movement, some movement that's actually transforming cities like Moscow, Idaho, or whatever city that churches like this that are actually interested in transforming their city with the gospel of Jesus Christ, like that's a good thing. That's beautiful. And they actually are. And then let's compare that to places like this where they put on conferences and they have trouble getting enough women to come to their singles mixer. Because, guess why? Because they actually, every bit of their messaging about women is about why women are awful. And also, Russell Moore actually thinks women are awful. Russell Moore thinks men are awful. Joel Webbin thinks men are awful and women are awful because both of these people don't have a biblical idea of what it means to be a man or a woman for that matter. Because women should not actually be relegated to their homes forever. They should be home focused. We could say that. We could say that women are not allowed to be in positions of leadership in the church. But then the whole 19th Amendment thing, this probably deserves its own podcast episode because people are going crazy about the 19th Amendment thing. In the CNN interview, Doug Wilson said he didn't like the 19th Amendment. And women actually, now hear me out, because I'm not a feminist for saying this. Women should be completely allowed to vote, biblically speaking. All women? No. Biblically, heads of households would make decisions. And if there's a single woman who's the head of her household, she should be able to vote. If there is a widow or if there is a single mother, like those people should be allowed to vote. Those people can vote in Presbyterian churches, or I guess in some Presbyterian churches. In Doug Wilson's denomination, women who are heads of their households can vote in presbytery meetings. Interesting. That's true. And so, of course, like everybody who follows him wouldn't disagree with him and say, no, women should never be allowed to vote. Like, this is actually one of those issues that's kind of nuanced. And so I would love to go into more details about that. But at the same time, there are these people who are weak men who hate women, who want to say, no, women are just, they're lesser beings, like Mormons or like Muslims, and say, no, women just aren't capable of making decisions on their own. They are not capable of that. Women and men are even intellectually fundamentally different, and women just can't even make decisions for other people. They shouldn't be allowed to do that. So they can't vote. Our hands of our future shouldn't be put in the hands of women, even though God made women's bodies to be able to create future humans. It's inconsistent. So I think both of these groups, they don't understand what true men and women is. And there is actually a kind of person out there that Russell Moore kind of has his finger on, but he's putting his finger in totally the wrong place. There is a group of people out there. And Canon Press's response to this was like they embraced it. They're like, haha, look who's calling us a loser. This guy who wears 2 masks. And they're right on. Like, Russell Moore is absolutely a loser. And him calling them that on a Christianity Today podcast is like a badge of honor. Like, it's hilarious. He's purely giving them attention. That's all he's doing. When he could be actually putting his finger on the right problem, but he can't because he doesn't have a grasp of a true biblical idea of manhood and womanhood or any of these other things he's talking about, actually.